Hi.
Well, hi, Eric. Well, welcome to the NatCon Australia podcast.
Yes, indeed. Sounds like going to be great fun.
Let's hope so. Hey, Donald Trump met the South African president in the Oval Office this week. It created a bit of controversy, so I thought it would be, very appropriate to speak to someone who is probably knows South Africa better than most people, having lived and worked there for a long period of time and devoted a lot of their academic study to it. I thought I'd kick things off, though, by asking how long has your family been in South Africa?
Yeah. My family arrived there in 1658.
Really? Yeah.
Long time.
And can you just fill in the historical picture for people? Did they come from, I assume, the Netherlands, or were they fleeing persecution, or what were the
Oh, well, a
circumstances?
mix. Yeah, I've got quite a mix. So yes, the original the Lowbit, right? They were Dutch settlers in Cape Town. Um, it was the Dutch East Indies India Company that set it up. So it was never intended as a colonization exercise.
Mm,
It was a company that set up a trading station. Well, actually a revictualling station. So the ships that were going past needed food to get to Indonesia, and that's what it was set up for. So you were sent there as a company employee, basically. And the Dutch East India Company tried everything in their power to stop the settlement of Southern Africa. They didn't want it to happen.
mm,
And basically, it happened by accident. Okay. They allowed some of these people to become farmers to increase the productivity of food. And my ancestors were amongst the first farmers that got released. And of course, once you were no longer a company employee, well, then they couldn't do anything, could they? And so these people spread into the interior, despite the company trying really, really hard to stop them, and just
mm.
spread over Southern Africa. That's what happened.
Yeah, right.
My mother's family are English speaking South Africans, so I kind of have the Dutch and the English side. And then of course the other input into this was the Huguenots, which had a huge impact on South Africa.
Mm,
Um, so they were French refugees, and the French refugees modified. They interbred with the Dutch, and of course once that happened, they were no longer Dutch. Now they were French Dutch mix.
yeah.
Um, and I realized when I went to Belgium, I realized that Afrikaans was much more like Flemish than Dutch, because
Is that
Flemish
right?
is Dutch as modified by French, and so is Afrikaans.
Ah,
So
interesting.
yeah, it's a different kind of language now.
Mm,
So yeah, I've got all that stuff. Yep,
yeah.
been there for a
So,
long time.
yeah, and you're, for those who don't know you, it'd be useful just to sketch also your academic and professional career. What have you been doing?
Okay,
For
well,
example.
okay. Well, I suppose if you go right back to when I left school, after leaving university, I was like everybody else. I was called up into the army. So, but that wasn't a career. That was you were put into the army for 2 years. When I came out of the army, I became a journalist. So I worked, in fact, on a liberal English newspaper in South Africa.
Mm,
Thereafter, I moved into academia. I then did a PhD, and I got into academia. Worked at universities in South Africa, um, and then moved to Australia and worked in an Australian university. So spent the longest amount of my time at Queensland University.
right. And is it correct to say at one stage you were an anti-apartheid activist? Uh,
Yeah, yes, I was. Yeah, in my youth, I was an idealistic, crazy lefty, as many students are, and I was one of those. I look back upon it now with great shame. Like, my God, what was I thinking? But there we go. But yes, I was an anti-apartheid activist.
mm,
Um, and then I was a member of the ANC as well. So I took part in all that stuff. In fact, when the ANC was unbanned, they had no infrastructure inside South Africa. They'd been illegal for years, and I was actually on the interim committee to help reestablish the ANC
mm,
inside the country, to bring the exiles back into structures.
yeah,
So
right.
yeah, I was an ANC activist, and that changed my mind, obviously, at some point. Yes.
Mm. Yeah. And so you would know did you meet people like Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki and those that were closely associated with the ANC and, well, leading the ANC back into power
Yeah,
in South Africa?
yeah,
Into
yeah, yes, yeah. At various times, one was in meetings with these people. Mandela's very first, his first public conference, well, it was a rally. The first massive rally that he held was actually in Durban,
mm,
and I was on the organizing committee uh, to put that rally together for the first time when he appeared. Um, so that's the first time I met him. Is when he obviously came to the rally that I'd helped to organize. Yeah.
mm. And, um, I mean, what were your impressions of these people? Just because, not everyone has had firsthand experience in dealing
Ah,
with them, but yeah.
they politicians. No, I mean seriously, they politicians.
Mm,
So certainly when it comes to somebody, and of course some are better politicians than others. Some are more
mm,
cynical than others. You get same as any other political party.
mm,
Um, I think uh, the Mandela thing is overdrawn, shall we say? I
mm,
mean, he's been turned into kind of Saint Mandela, and he wasn't a saint.
mm,
Um, the story that one hears The story one hears about Mandela in the Anglo world, so in Australia, in America, in Britain, is not
mm,
the same as the story that South Africans know.
mm,
There he's a politician, and everybody understands he's a politician. Whereas Mandela became a saint because the one thing he was fantastically good at was to speak liberal speak. So I mean, you must
mm,
understand that Mandela was a member of the Communist Party. He was a communist, and he was a
mm,
committed communist. He also, in fact, inside the ANC, Mandela was deemed a radical.
right.
He was the radical. He was the crazy guy. He was the guy who said, "We got to go to war. We have to set up terrorism organization to start killing these whites because this is unacceptable now." And so he was the guy who
Mm,
established Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the military wing of the ANC, against, even though he'd been instructed not to do it by the ANC leadership. So he went
mm,
off to North Africa and he was trained as a terrorist by the Soviets. He was the FLN, the people that were fighting the French in Algeria. He
mm,
went there and they taught him how to do this stuff. And then he came back. It was actually most of the people that set up the military wing of the ANC, believe it or not, were white South Africans. They were not black South Africans. They were members of the South African Communist Party who were mostly whites. And he formed Umkhonto we Sizwe with those guys. And it was set up in a white area, in one of the richest white areas in the country, in fact, was where they were based.
Where
And
in
that's
Cape
why
Town?
he,
Is
it's called Sandton. It's the richest suburb in Johannesburg.
okay.
Um, Very Jewish area because most of the Communist Party were Jewish South Africans, as it turns
Mm,
out, and so that's where the origins of it were. And so
mm,
he was put into jail for being not for political activity, but for his terrorist activity, because
mm,
he went out sort of blowing up things basically, which is outside world doesn't quite get that. Um, but he was extremely good at. He was gifted at this. He could speak liberal speak. So inside the ANC, he would speak Marxist speak. And as soon as he spoke to people outside the ANC, particularly if he was speaking to Australians or British or Americans, he would suddenly become this liberal. I just want a liberal democratic state, guys. What's the problem? And because of that, Anglos latched onto him. He actually said at one stage, "I'm an Anglophile." Um, English people felt very comfortable with him.
mm.
He just was that kind of guy.
Do you
And when he was on trial for treason,
mm,
that's when he made his political career because he articulated it so well in liberal speak. Um,
yeah,
but he actually was never the leader of the ANC before being released from jail. He was always number two. The actual guy who reestablished the ANC, who built it and who made it into what it was a man by the name of Walter Sisulu. And on Robben Island, Walter Sisulu was prisoner number one, and Mandela was prisoner number two because he was not the leader.
mm,
And again, people don't know that.
no. I was aware of the violent past, or at least the quote unquote terrorist actions of the ANC and Mandela. But is it correct to say that his his political attitudes did mature over time? Because the impression I get is that post his release, he was certainly better than many of the other much more radical alternatives on offer. Is that a fair assessment?
Look, he was the guy. Look, the reason. Okay, when the National Party decided that they were going to negotiate and end apartheid, etc., and bring the ANC in,
Mm,
that was actually quite early on. It was about 1986 when they decided this,
mm,
and by 1987 they were rolling it out. So all the time when the world was going, "You're a bunch of crazy nutters and you don't want to negotiate," it wasn't true. They were negotiating all along,
mm,
and they realized that the person they had to negotiate with, or the person they had to bring on board, was Mandela, because he was the crazy radical. He was the guy who went to war. He was the guy you had to get to say, "Yes, let's stop the war." Only
mm,
he could do that. And so what they did is they actually took him out of jail, and people don't realize that. So he came out of he wasn't on, at the end, he wasn't on Robben Island. He was put into a very nice house with a jacuzzi and a swimming pool and all that stuff in Cape Town. Um, and he spent the last, whatever it was, 5 years or whatever it was, I think, there. And that was a place where people were meeting him. So what the National Party government then did is they let activists go and visit him from every city, from every committee all around the country, to go and talk to him, because by then he'd said, "Okay, let's negotiate." And he had to say to every single ANC committee, wherever they were in the country, "Stop the war, let's negotiate now. The moment
mm,
has come to negotiate." So yes, he decided that he came to the conclusion that neither side could win the war. I mean, that's when wars stop. Wars
mm.
stop when both sides realize we're just going to keep slugging this out forever, and that's never going to end. And of
But
course,
he wa
that's
he wa
exactly.
he wasn't was he still, do you think, a committed Marxist, when he attained the presidency? That doesn't seem to be the
Yes,
impression I had.
absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah,
unambiguously. They were all
really?
Marxists. Yeah, absolutely,
Hmm,
absolutely. Every member, in fact, even today, I mean, the ANC and the South African Communist Party are still in alliance today. They're like the coalition between the Libs and the Libs and Nats. It's exactly
yeah,
like that. Today, they operate exactly as a coalition, and they share out cabinet posts like that. It
really?
was, no, absolutely. In fact, look, that was the reason I actually ended up leaving and coming to Australia, because I was inside the organization. I was inside the ANC.
Mm,
But what I was hearing was that they were saying one thing outside and another thing inside,
mm,
and they were not the same. And I kind of realized that, okay, so outside they're projecting this idea of we're liberals, we just want a liberal state.
mm,
And they sold it to the entire liberal press, the global press around the world, who promoted this idea and still do.
mm,
Inside, it was a Marxist organization, unambiguously, and that's what they were trying to do. And that is what
really?
they wanted to. Um, the other thing that happened is that you must understand Mandela never ran the country. People outside don't realize that. People inside South Africa understand that.
Mm,
Although he became the president, he wasn't the president. And the reason was that when he'd become old, he'd been in jail a long time, and he was out of touch.
mm,
Politics in South Africa had moved on dramatically, and you had the UDF, which was a kind of internal wing of the ANC. The UDF were very, very different to the ANC. The struggle inside the country, the one that I was part of, very different to the struggle outside the country. Mandela didn't understand that. He had no
mm,
idea about all this stuff.
really?
And so what happened is that the ANC realized we can't make him the leader. He can't be he hasn't got it. He's old and he's out of touch and he can't do this anymore.
Mm,
However, the entire world, including us, through say the Mandela concert, etc., we've boosted him as the president. He's the leader. We can't make him go away now. And anyway, that's a good thing because his role was to play the kind grandfather. And
mm,
remember, he was a very the things you gotta understand is he was a very disciplined party man. He kept saying so. If you go and listen to his speeches, he keeps saying, "I'm not the leader. I'm a party man. I play by the party rules. If the
mm,
party tells me to do something, I do it." And the party said to him, right, you're not going to be president, but you are going to be our public relations guy. And what we want
Mm,
you to do is you are going to go around kissing little white babies on the head and telling them it's all cool. And you're going to go around calming all these white guys down because they got their hands on the levers of power. They can stop this just like that at any time.
mm,
They can just call it off when they want to. And there's nothing we can do about it. They have the power, we don't. We have to transfer the levers of power into our hands. And while that process is happening, we have to keep them on side and they have to love us. And you're the guy that's going to do that. That's your job. And because he was an old guy and he wasn't, you see, that meant he wasn't a politician anymore. He
mm.
literally wasn't a politician anymore. He didn't have to play politics. He didn't have to know what was going on inside the organization or what people were saying. He could simply go out and be the PR guy.
Mm.
And he did. And he played the role of a kindly grandfather brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. I mean, he pulled it off. The real president was Thabo Mbeki from day one. So, in fact, Mandela's office was not connected by phone to the outside world. Mbeki's, was a deputy president. All the phones went to his office. He ran the country. And his
Mm.
job was to get his hands on the levers of power as quickly as you can. And he did. He was very good at it. Mbeki is a very clever guy. And he's a skilled technocratic politician who understands power and how to get it. And he got it.
So was his motivation ideological, Marxist as well, or was it motivated by um, animus towards the white population, or is that a distinction without a difference?
Which one? Are you talking about Mandela or Mbeki?
Oh well, both actually. I mean, the impression I have is that um, things got more radical after Mandela left the scene. I mean, he was,
But he was playing a game.
you know,
I'll tell you the moment. There was an actual moment when it got more radical. You can
mm,
track it to a particular event.
mm,
And the event was in 1997 when Mandela was still president. But he was bowing out. He retired. It
yeah,
was the first. It was an ANC conference, their national conference, which was
mm,
held in Mafeking. And so it was the first. I think it was indeed the first ANC conference that had been held after they'd taken power.
mm,
And by then, Mbeki had got his hands on the levers of power. I mean, the transfer of power from whites to blacks was astonishingly quick, and it was quick
mm,
because the whites facilitated it.
yeah,
They used affirmative action, and they actually simply purged the civil service and the military and the police of white guys. They just knocked them out very, very, very quickly and put black
mm,
guys in. They put their guys in. It's called cadre deployment. It's one of the shittiest things they learned in Eastern Europe. They just
right,
deployed the cadres into all these positions like that.
mm,
3 years, literally 3 years, and they had their hands on the levers of power. And as
mm.
soon as Mbeki said, "We're in charge now, they can't stop us anymore. We got it." That at that conference, I believe Mbeki wrote the speech. Mandela simply delivered it because that was his retirement speech. Goodbye, guys, as we say. You can go and think it's on the web. You can go and read the damn thing. And the
Right.
speech goes on. Mandela upbraids whites for not being apologetic enough. And then he says, reconciliation's over now. Now we change. Now we go for change. That was it. It's unambiguous. That was from the moment, just like that.
Mm.
And everybody
Yeah.
missed that. Journalists didn't want to report that because
No,
it did,
it
they'd had this miracle discourse and, the nice guy and the miracle. They didn't want to go and say this was happening. So they just
well,
didn't report it.
they still don't wanna hear
Oh,
about,
of course they don't.
any of the other, negative consequences that have occurred, which brings us to the Oval Office, I guess. We can, go back to the history of,
Yeah.
modern
Yep.
in South Africa, but, famous well, it was an interesting scene, right, in the Oval Office where Donald Trump, showed the President Cyril Ramaphosa, scenes of, which was alleged evidence of persecution of white, South Africans there. And the liberal press, and late night comics in the United States, they've sort of tried to rubbish it and downplay it. BBC did a fact check and said, "Oh no, there's this, that, and the other is wrong." I think it's probably worth going through some of their claims. I mean, what do you say to the argument that yes, it's terrible, but it's just symptomatic of a wider spread criminality in South Africa, and it's not necessarily disproportionately impacting on whites compared to
on
others.
white guys. Mm. Okay. All right. Look, let's put it this way. I would not use the word genocide to
Mm,
describe what is happening to the
mm,
farmers. I mean, I've written a lot about South Africa. I've written books about it. I've never used the word. I've never gone there because it's
yep,
not right. It's not a
no,
genocide. Genocide implies that there is an intent to do the dudes in. It's a political intent to do them in.
mm,
I don't think that that's what's there. There is maliciousness, and there's
mm,
political maliciousness. There's maliciousness on the part of all the black political parties, including the ANC,
mm,
toward white guys. That is certainly there, and they've done some truly awful things. And we can go into some of the things that they've done, particularly to Afrikaners.
mm,
Um, okay, the argument, and yes, of course, the thing is, Trump didn't present it well. I mean, Trump
mm,
Trump is not a spin doctor, right? He's very bad at that spin doctoring stuff. He doesn't.
mm,
Yeah, he really is. He kind of he overstates things, and he gets his facts sort of jumbled up and wrong,
mm,
and he made mistakes. In this case, he made. I think there would. As I was listening to him, I went, "Oh my god! Well, you should have had a South African there to tell you not. You can't say that, dude. You know, if you
mm,
just had me there, I would have told you not to do that."
mm,
I think he made two mistakes like that, but they're
mm,
not catastrophic mistakes. They
mm,
don't they don't change the fact that something bad is happening. So this kind of global mainstream media thing was there's nothing to see here. It's all what's the problem? That's nonsense. Of course, there's
mm,
something to see there. Something bad is happening.
mm,
Um, the thing about crime, yes, of course, South Africa has. Okay, that is one of the things the ANC has done. The ANC has literally wrecked the country. They they have destroyed the civil service. But they have Mbeki, no, sorry, not Mbeki. Ramaphosa himself, about must have been about 18 months, 2 years ago, he himself said, "We are an incapable state. I have no civil servants who can execute my instructions anymore. We've broken it." He said it himself. It's true. They don't have a functioning civil service. They don't have, there is no functioning police. And therefore, they can't protect these guys. They can't protect anybody. Living in South Africa is like living in a state of anarchy. And anarchy is, oh, it is literally anarchy. And once you've lived in anarchy, you understand that that's the worst condition for human beings. There's nothing worse than anarchy. I
yeah,
mean, a full blown Stalinist state is better than anarchy. Trust me. At least you know where you stand. You know what
mm,
to do. That's the rules. Don't break the rules. It's okay. In anarchy, there are no rules. You could just be going to work. Sorry. You can be going to work and you can die.
mm. But is that different in different parts of South Africa? I mean, it's a big country. Imagine
Yes.
Cape Town is different to parts
It's
of
it's
the
not as
rural.
it's
Yeah.
yes, the Western Cape is not governed by the ANC.
Mm,
And the Western Cape is still real. I mean, it's crime. I mean,
mm.
Aussies would think it's just horrendous. I mean, if you look at the statistics for Cape Town, Aussies would die 1,000 deaths. And they go like, how can this possibly be?
So
Because
is
it's
it?
pretty bad.
So is it? I mean,
But
is
the
it
rest
to
of the
sort of
country is
for
anarchy.
criminality or what? Yeah.
Yeah.
I- I-
Well, it's the fact there's no police force.
mm,
That's the fact. There's no police force. There is no law and order, and has not been for years.
mm,
Now, but now, okay, when if we get back to the farmer thing,
mm,
okay, okay, the yes, this is criminality against the farmers.
yeah.
And by the way, the criminality is not just in the rural areas. The criminality is in the urban areas as well. In fact, it's probably worse in the rural areas, in the
Mm,
urban areas. But people focus on the farming thing because that's the stereotype of South Africa. Now, when crime is carried out against these Afrikaner farmers, two things. One, the statistical probability of a white Afrikaner farmer having crime carried out against him is like 3 times the level of anybody else in the country.
mm,
Statistically, they're just more likely to have crime carried out against them. More importantly, when crime is carried out against these white farmers, it goes beyond crime. You see, most crime, I mean, the country now is violent, And that's because all the criminals have AK-47s. You got warlords. The country is now run by warlords. That's the other thing outside the country people don't understand. It's like the rest of Africa. Warlords have taken over the country, and they control their little bit of it. And they have their armed gangs, armed with AK-47s. And if you have criminals wandering around with AK-47s, that's pretty violent. Okay,
Mm,
it's not just a few poor people with beating up someone to get their food. It's not like that. This is organized crime by warlords and their gangs.
mm,
Now, when they carry out crime against the farmers, it is more brutal. It's unambiguously more brutal. They don't just kill these guys, they torture them to death. They always torture them to death. They will start by torturing the children in front of the parents, and then they'll torture the wife in front of the husband, and then finally they'll kill him. But it's slow, it's systematic, and it's nasty. Now, and the one organization, AfriForum, they published a book about it. I mean, if you read it, it's just horrendous. You can't believe
mm,
people can do this to other people. Now, see, you do have to recognize that. That means there is some political motivation going on.
yeah.
And of course, AfriForum, in fact, took the government to court. They went to the Constitutional Court and said, "You guys are doing nothing to stop this because you don't want to. You're not interested. Because you just come up with these excuses all the time." And they also said the singing of these songs. So if you keep singing a song in Zulu, which means "go kill the boar," well, some people are going to take that literally.
It's worth focusing on that because that was also raised in the Oval Office, and the response, I think, from the South African president was, "Oh, that's just a minor party."
Yes,
A
but
a
his own
it's
party did it. The ANC did it. I mean, I
as
think I
well.
sent you the video. I
Mm,
mean, that video is worth distributing. And by the way, I saw that video when it first went up, and I thought, "Holy crap, this is fantastic." And I downloaded it. Thank God I downloaded it with YouTube. Within a week,
mm.
they'd taken it down. It
Is that
disappeared.
right?
It's really hard to get that now.
Really? Okay.
So, but that was at an ANC conference, okay? Their national conference in Bloemfontein, and the president of the country, who's an ANC president, got up and sang the song, and everybody there sang along with him, including Ramaphosa.
What about the claim that, I think even CNN made this, that, "Oh, well, yes, they're saying 'kill the ball,' but it's really just to sort of, um"
Yeah, it's a war song. It's a song from the war. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you see, it was. That's how the song started.
Mm,
It's a song. That song was indeed in all the guerrilla training camps, and it wasn't just a South African song, by the way. The
okay.
Zimbabwean guerrillas, Mugabe's guerrillas, sang the same song. Because they all trained together. So the Zimbabwean, the Namibian, the South African, the Frelimo, the Mozambique, and Angola, all those guerrillas, they were surrogates of the Soviet Union, and they were run and paid for by the Soviet Union. They were all trained together and worked together. And so they all sang that song because throughout Southern Africa, in fact, the word Boer, well, for them it's Amabunu. In Zulu, it's Amabunu. Amabunu doesn't mean Boer, doesn't mean Afrikaner, it means white. That's the
Right.
word black people use to describe white people.
Okay.
Because for them, the Boers are the biggest and they're the biggest problem, but it's all white people all over Amabunu.
Mm,
Okay. So yes, it is. And it was the song they used in their military training. I mean, I was conscripted into the army, and when you train, they make you sing while you're doing your exercises because it's bloody hard. It takes your breath away, and that's the whole point. It's to make
mm,
you suffer, and then it develops your lungs if you have to
mm,
sing while running. Okay,
okay.
and so all militaries do that. That's why they do it. In
Mm,
the guerrilla training, they used to sing that song, which is to go. They would sing, "We're going to kill whites while training." So yes, that's exactly what it was. That's what it
mm,
is. And of course, so they could say you can say it's a traditional song. Well, yes, okay, uh, y- but the war's over now.
mm.
Must the white guys see the white guys are also? I was in the South African army. What must
Mm.
I sing my war songs? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems
So
odd, doesn't it?
so how would you characterize what is going on? Is it a case that the it's not a deliberate policy of genocide, but it's one where the government, South African government, is leaving these farmers vulnerable and sort of
Okay, yes,
subtly
okay,
encouraging the people,
yeah,
to take action
yes.
against them. Is that right or not?
It's a mix of two things.
Mm,
I think the ANC government is culpable in this. And singing the songs and allowing the songs to be sung creates culpability. But also, more than that, the speeches made by Ramaphosa. I can show you speech after speech that Ramaphosa himself has made over the last 4 years as president,
Mm.
and many of his speeches. And that's because he's in competition with Malema. Remember, Malema is trying to outdo him. They're in competition over votes.
Just explain that a bit
And,
more for people who aren't as you know uh,
okay,
closely
okay,
following South African politics about who these people
okay.
are.
The economic freedom fighters
Mm,
are the new political party. That's Malema's party. Malema was a leader in the ANC. He was the leader of the youth league,
mhm,
and he kind of got. Well, they told him to stop singing that song at one stage because he was doing it every day, and it was really getting bad. And they said, "Look,
mm,
relax, dude, calm down." And so, and then eventually they expelled him from the party. And then he formed his own party, which is like it's a breakaway of the ANC. The ANC has had two breakaways. The one is the breakaway led by Malema, which is the EFF, and the other breakaway, which is more recent, is the one by Zuma, which is the MK party. So you've got three parties in South Africa: the ANC, the EFF, and MK, which are all three of them have the same policies. If you read their policies, are the same. They all want the same thing. They want what they call transformation, is the word. They have an ideology of transformation. And transformation is it basically translates into a Marxist redistribution of wealth from whites to blacks. They all want it. They all want exactly the same thing. It's the same policy. And interestingly enough, the person who wrote the policy of transformation was Malema when he was inside the ANC. And now they've all
right,
copied it. So they
mm,
all have the same policy. It's about how quick do you want to do it and on what terms. So Malema says, let's go now. Let's do a Mugabe. That's what he says. Let's just do a Mugabe right now. What are you waiting for, dudes?
mm,
Whereas um, the ANC is in the more moderate side, and they say, geez, if we do that, the world's going to jump all over us. So let's do it, but do it in a way that the outside world can't. It's like boiling a frog. In fact, Ramaphosa used the expression, we're going to boil a frog. Let them not notice we're doing it, and they leave us alone. And then MK sort of somewhere in the middle. But they all been going for the same thing. So that's the culpability part, right?
mm,
But there's another element to this as well, which is the part of the story nobody ever talks about. Now, we go back to the farmer thing now, right? How did the farmer thing happen in the first place? Okay, now it happened like this. And you can track it to, again, a particular date when it all starts. Now, okay, South Africa, like Australia, is a big, dry, empty country.
mm,
So farms are far apart, huge distances between these farmers. They live really
mm,
isolated lives, like in Australia.
mm,
Because of that, the state in South Africa, going way back to when, as I said, the Dutch East India Company didn't even want these guys to go into the interior.
mm,
And when they went, they kind of washed their hands of them and said, "We don't want you out there. We're not going to help you. There's no government, there's no police force to come look after you guys. Work it out yourselves then." So they did. So those early Afrikaner settlers into the interior of the country, they all set up a system called a commando. In fact, the word commando is now used in armies, and that's where it comes from. The commandos was originally a kind of semi-military group set up by Afrikaner settlers in the interior, and these commandos, they operated like a neighborhood watch, but it was a neighborhood watch for rural areas, and
mm,
they all came to each other's help. So if something went wrong, if one of your neighbors was under attack, you all got together, you got on your horse and you rode and helped it. Okay, so they club because there was a club of them working together as a semi-military unit. They policed their own area, and because everyone in the area knew they were there, so that they established the law and order. Now that system, the commando system, which was the way that the rural areas were policed
mm.
through this kind of neighborhood watch system, shall we call it?
Yeah.
This had operated since the 17th century, unbroken throughout the whole of rural South Africa.
Mm,
When the ANC came to power, they said, "My God, we can't have white people with guns. This is dangerous."
mm,
So in 2000, I think it was 2002, 2003, was about then,
yep,
the ANC outlawed commandos. They banned them. And in fact, they disarmed them. They went and took their guns away from them. And they said, no, you can't do this anymore. We're the government. We will look after you. But of course,
Okay.
as I've just told you, there is no police force functioning. So they
Mm,
couldn't look after them. Now, if you go and disarm, and they did it very publicly, it was a big deal. See, the kind of black folk in the country, the ANC's voters, they thought this was a wonderful moment because it was a little bit like going and slapping white guys in the face. Ha, ha, ha. You've had commandos for hundreds of years. Well, we've just
mm,
taken it away from you. See, we're in
mm,
charge now. That's what it was like.
mm,
One of my friends, in fact, in the ANC described it. We were joking amongst each other, and he actually said to me, he said, it feels a little bit like a dog pissing on a pole to say, this is mine. And it was like that. It had that feel to it.
yeah.
So they outlawed the commando system, yeah, and then didn't supply any policing in the rural areas. Well, every black guy in the country knew that had just happened. It's like an open invitation.
Mm,
These guys are defenseless now. Go get them. That's what
mm,
happened. And it was from that moment onward that all this happened. So, of course, Afrikaners feel a little bit peeved about this. And they go, but you caused this. But you know,
mm.
they don't want to talk about that stuff. So you see, they're culpable in two different ways.
Yeah. Well, and what do you think someone like the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, what do you think he genuinely thinks about this situation? Is he just is he concerned, or is he just concerned about international how the international community perceives it?
I've often asked myself that question. I
Mm,
often wonder what he thinks. He's a smart guy.
mm,
He can't not see the fact that the country's a mess. He
mm,
cannot honestly believe this is all going well. And I often ask myself, what do you think at night to yourself? When you go to bed, does it keep you awake at night? Um, you see, remember I told you that Mandela was a guy who could speak liberal speak. Well, Ramaphosa
mm,
is the other one. They've had two politicians like that. But Ramaphosa, you must understand something about Ramaphosa. He's a very interesting character. Ramaphosa, he never went into exile. He never went into exile with the ANC. He stayed in the country. He was part of the kind of team that I was on, the
mm,
activists inside it. And he was a trade unionist. So he was a trade unionist in Kasatu, which is now the governing coalition in South Africa has got three players. It's got the ANC, South African Communist Party, and Kasatu, and that's the coalition.
mm,
He was the Kasatu guy, the union guy, but he was their negotiator. He's a brilliant. He's because he was a trade union negotiator and he was the best they had. He used to run circles around white business. He was just really good at it. And
mm,
that's how they also used him during the negotiations and the constitutional negotiations. He was the ANC's main negotiator because he's so good at this stuff. And you
mm,
kind of saw a bit of it when he was with Trump there. He knows how to, he just knows to some extent, okay, no, I'm going to go there. I'm going to hold back. No, he's just, that's his skill.
mm,
But now, if you look at where Ramaphosa comes from, it's really has an interesting history because his career was made by white business in South Africa, by liberals. Liberals
mm,
built him up because he was this smart, nice, moderate kind of black guy. Okay. And they thought, this is the kind of guy we want. In fact, they still, in many ways, think he's their guy. Now, the richest guy in the country was a man called Harry Oppenheimer. And he lived at a place called Brenthurst. That was his house in Johannesburg. And he
mm,
formed the Brenthurst Group, which are all the rich guys in South Africa. And they were in the 1970s and 80s going, my God, how do we stop this mess? How do we stop this war? What do we do? And the Brenthurst Group set up a thing called the Urban Foundation. And the Urban Foundation was a group that was paid for, it was like an NGO, but an internal South African NGO, paid for by these rich liberal businessmen. One of whom was Rupert, the guy who was there. That Rupert guy, the Afrikaner businessman, he was one of them in the room with Trump. And so all these rich guys got together and they said, we have to persuade the National Party to get rid of apartheid. How do we do that? We have to argue that South Africa has to urbanize, which is the opposite of what the National Party is trying to do, which is to de-urbanize. And if we bring everybody together into our cities, we can build this wonderful utopia, a capitalist utopia is what they've.
back on again, sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Is it okay?
Go ahead.
The guy that they hired was Ramaphosa. So
Mm,
the Brenthurst Group hired Ramaphosa as their guy at the Urban Foundation to try and promote this idea of change.
Mm.
Okay, and he was built up by them as their guy, and they worked on him from then. So he worked inside the liberal camp to try and bring about change.
Mm.
And as far as I know, and I don't know this for sure, but as far as I know, Ramaphosa was never a member of the Communist Party. He's one of the few that wasn't a member of the Communist
Interesting.
Party. Okay.
Mm.
Although he's unambiguously, I mean, inside Kasatu, they're Marxists. So they might not be members of the Communist Party, but they are still Marxists.
Mm.
Whereas it's like, okay. So, but yes, Ramaphosa was the business guy inside the ANC. The ANC, okay, then the Brenters group had this other little plan that they brought into being. And this was toward the end of when they saw that the ANC were going to come into power. And the Brenters group said, the commies are going to take over. These guys are going to take over the country within the next 10 years, unambiguously. And because they were terrified. They were going to have a communist government now.
Mm.
So the Brenters group said, since we're going to have communists as the government of the country, the question they asked themselves is, how do you turn a communist into a capitalist? Okay? And the Brenters group came up with a plan to do that. And the plan was you take the politicians, you take the ANC politicians, and you make them very, very rich, very, very quickly. And they will
Mm.
become capitalists. And that's what the Brenters group did. So every rich guy in South Africa, I don't know what the percentage was, but it was probably 25% of their wealth. They cut off 20 to 25% of all their companies, dumped it in a big fund. And then when the ANC came to power, the Brenters group handed out the goodies to all these politicians, one of whom was Ramaphosa. They turned them into billionaires overnight.
Mm. Well, he has a very plummy. I noticed in that White Oval Office interaction, he had a very sort of plummy, educated accent, didn't he? In the way he engaged, he certainly seemed the liberal part.
He knows how to, he's always been very good at, I mean, he, like Mandela, knows how to sound like a liberal. And
Mm.
he did work for long to say. But I mean, but because you know that thing where we in Australia said if we turn the communists in China into capitalists, they'll be like us.
Mm.
And it didn't work out like that.
Mm.
Well, South Africa had the same problem. So the liberals in South Africa decided that if you turned all these commie politicians into capitalists by making them rich, they would be like you. Well, it didn't
Right.
work out like that. What you
Yeah.
ended up with was rich communists. And in fact, in South Africa, there's a word for them. South Africans have a word for these people like Ramaphosa.
Mm.
They call them Gucci comrades
Oh,
because
okay.
they are
Nice.
comrades.
Yeah.
I mean, they flaunt their wealth. They are unbelievably wealthy,
Mm.
and but they haven't stopped being communists.
But do they, in some sense, provide a bulwark against complete and utter appropriation of all assets by the state, or they? I mean, did the theory work at least in part?
Ah, look, um, look. What happened is that the Constitution is what was nailed them down.
Mm.
So when they negotiated a constitution, um, the constitution that was negotiated, and they did the same thing in Namibia, by the way. In fact, it worked better. It turned out that the constitutional approach worked better in Namibia than it did in South Africa, ultimately.
Mm.
But what they did is they wrote entrenched clauses into the constitution. And those entrenched clauses were, you can't take our property. I mean, that's number one. That's the
Mm.
crucial clause that you built in. It's an entrenched clause. You may not take our property from us.
Mm.
So they figured, well, if we've got that in the Constitution and it's entrenched there, that's it. We're safe. It's all good. What's the problem now? Now, and because that's the law that they've just changed. That's what triggered all this. That's what triggered Trump to do this.
Yeah.
That's where it
Right.
all started. Because basically, um, it was holding up the whole process. They've been doing it anyway. I mean, the argument that they haven't taken land is nonsense. Of course they've taken land. They've
So,
taken
Eric,
huge amount.
I mean, is it possible for South Africa to be turned around? What can the quote unquote international community or the United States do, or is it simply not possible to make a course correction.
Mm. Look, South Africa is a fantastically complex, messy place.
Mm,
It's just unbelievable. All right.
mm,
Eh, the- In my opinion, South Africa has a basic structural problem that is inbuilt into the very society. South Africa brings together two cultures that are irreconcilable.
mm,
I mean, I really mean that. Western culture and African culture just don't mix. It's like acid. When you see them interact, it's like they eat each other.
really.
And and one of the reasons is that Western culture is all about wealth making and entrepreneurship and doing stuff. They're taking control and individuals go out there and do stuff. African culture is not. African
Mm,
culture, Africa, if you look at Africa, it doesn't have a middle class. It doesn't have a middle class entrepreneurial crew. That's Africa's disaster.
mm,
Now, and that's the South African problem. So, and the demographics of South Africa, of course, are just horrendous. Now, if you go back to the apartheid era, the population was then about 25% of the population was white. So it was 25% white, three quarters other people, but say black, colored, Indian, etc.
mm,
Now it's not like that anymore. Because one of the things is that, I mean, black people are just becoming demographically the majority. It's like I think there's 60 million black people now, and it's now down to 4 million white guys. Because the white guys are leaving, and the ones that are leaving are the breeding population. So they're making their kids outside the country now. So the population
yeah.
just crashed, just disappearing. I mean, literally, whites are going to disappear. You go back in 100 years' time, I don't even know there'll be white guys there. Because that's what you saw happen in Zimbabwe. They just melted away. Um,
Mm,
and so you've got these two different groups, and it's becoming a black country. And black guys, they struggle to run a Western type economy, a Western type politics, society. They just don't do it. I mean, across Africa, they don't do it. And when you hand it over to them, it melts away. It just falls to bits. And I think Ramaphosa understands that. He actually understands that. I mean, you wouldn't have to have affirmative action and black economic empowerment to try and boost blacks if it wasn't a problem. It's the problem. So they've created if you look at the black elite in the country, they're an artificially generated elite.
yeah.
They didn't do it themselves. They didn't build any of this themselves.
It's such a strong message, which it, the liberal international press just won't be able to accept, right? Because
Well,
it
because
clashes against.
they'll
Yeah,
say you're a racist. They're gonna go,
yeah.
"You're a racist. How can you say such a thing?"
Mm,
Well, the evidence, I'm afraid, is overwhelming. What can I say?
mm.
I mean, I obviously never used to think this, did I? I was a member
How,
of the ANC.
yeah, yeah. How could
I,
how could it have been how could it have been different, Eric? I mean, when you were, because there are a lot. I've heard you speak previously. Apartheid was, there was a flawed system in many ways and a complicated history and a misunderstood one in many ways. But how could it have turned out differently, or is that not possible?
yeah, yeah. Okay, I have now. I ended up researching a book on apartheid at a certain time,
Mm,
and the reason was that when I came to Australia, people kept asking me, "What is this thing?"
mm,
And I realized that in order to answer the question, I needed to write a book. So I ended up writing a book to
mm,
explain it to myself, to explain it to them as to what was going on. And I went and did a whole bunch of research on apartheid that I had not known these things before. I'd
yeah.
never gone and read what they said. So I went and read
Mm,
all these documents in Afrikaans, their own in-house documents as to what they thought they were doing. And I went, "Oh my God, I didn't know this is what thought they were doing." And it was
mm,
a big surprise to me. All right. One of the things that the National Party guys said was that the British Empire threw people together who don't belong together. I think it's true. I mean,
mm,
really, it really does come down to that. Once you've done it, how do you unscramble the egg?
mm,
Which is what they tried to do. They were trying to unscramble the egg until they finally discovered they couldn't. And they go, okay, let's give up. That's not going to work anymore. I mean, that's the guy who actually said, let's stop apartheid was P.W. Botha, the guy everybody thinks is a completely crazy right-wing guy. He was the reformer. He said,
mm.
we can't unscramble the egg. So why are we trying to do this? Why are we inflicting all this pain on everybody when we know we can't do it? We have to come up with something else. And then he came up with a new model. They call it consociationalism. And I think basically, I do think consociationism could have worked if the West had allowed them to do it. But the Americans said, no, that's too complex for Africa. You can't do that. I think it was a terrible mistake. It was a terrible lost opportunity because I actually do think that consociationalism could actually have been the solution, or could have been a solution.
What does that mean? I'm not familiar with that term. How would it have looked like?
Okay. Uh, it's a little bit like Switzerland.
A
Okay.
federation, right? Is that? I mean,
Well, it's a confederation. It's rather
con-
a federation is much closer than a confederation. So
mm,
what you do is you have, if you look at Switzerland, it's like little ethnic states. Each one
yeah.
is like the German one and a French one and an Italian one, whatever, right? And then they confederate. So the
Mm,
actual level of government is at the canton level. You govern yourselves at the canton level. And you do it ethnically because there it is.
yeah.
But then you confederate. And the confederation is a confederation of leaders. So leaders from this local level get taken up to the national level, where they learn to cooperate and govern the stuff where you have to cooperate. So,
Mm,
in the South African sense, that's what they were trying to create. One of the things, okay, they created these separate states for black guys, the homelands. So
mm,
Zulus had their own state and Xhosas and all that. Each tribe had its own country. Okay, those were the Nats wanted that to carry on. So they would have still been the kind of like cantons, if you like, but they're ethnically based cantons. Yeah,
mm,
but then they would also have had a parliament for the urban areas, and there would have been that was what they started with, the tricameral parliament, which had a house for Indians, a house for coloreds, and a house for whites.
mm,
My understanding was that the next stage was to create a house for urban black guys. So there would have been 4 chambers in the parliament.
mm.
And then that machine would have then confederated to the homelands. In fact, actually they were looking at introducing other countries. They said, we can bring Botswana into this. We can bring Swaziland. We can bring Lesotho in. We can bring Namibia. Like, oh, why not? Let's make
And I,
South
bel-
Africa.
I mean, my understanding of South African history is not as good as yours, but I believe was people like Chief Buthelezi were actually notionally in
Yes,
favour of.
they thought that was a good idea. Yeah. So in fact, that was one of the ironies. When after the Nats had given up on apartheid, if you look at
Mm,
1994, when the Constitution was supposed to be brought in, right?
mm,
The last people to fight for apartheid were 3 black leaders. Black guys fought to the end for apartheid. Buthelezi was one of them. Said, "I'm not giving in to the ANC socialists." No.
um,
Okay, and the other and the moment when it ended, when everybody in the country knew it was all over, was there was one particular homeland called Bophuthatswana, which is where the Tswana people live. And the leader of that homeland was a guy called Mangope. And Mangope said, "No, I'm not negotiating with the ANC. I'm an independent state. I'm not giving up my independence." He actually had put together a pretty good state. I mean, they were economically viable. They didn't need anybody to help them. And he said, "I'm not going into this South African thing with the ANC." Now, that meant that there would have been 3 million South Africans who could not vote in the election. They would have stuffed up the whole thing. You couldn't have
yeah.
the settlement, you see? And he said, "I'm not doing it. No, sorry, I'm independent. Go away." And at that point, Ramaphosa persuaded de Klerk to send the white South African army in to overthrow him. They did.
Yeah.
So white South Africa, they called up white South African troops, sent them into his capital, and overthrew him. The image, and they've taken all those images down as well now. They used to be on YouTube. They've all gone. There were these
Interesting. Yeah.
fantastic shots
It
of
just it just
overthrown.
it just clashes with. It would just be a. I can see why it would have been such a hard sell to the international community to put in
Mm,
in place this
I
complicated.
understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Um,
I understand. It was like they're going, no, you see, well, that's what happened. And at the end of the day, the American ambassador said to the Nats,
mm,
he said, "It's too complicated for Africa. We know how to do democracy, and the way you do democracy is you have a single parliament, everybody gets the vote, and you have a 2-party system, and that's what we
yeah.
understand. That's what we're going to have here."
And they would have
and
viewed it through the lens of the civil rights movement in the United States too, and seen it in
that's
those. Yeah.
all that stuff.
Hey, I try and keep these things to an hour, so I'll ask a final question and then, which is probably a controversial one, but and there's so much you could talk about. I just know I've listened to you before, and your understanding and the nuances of South African history, both modern and over the years, is you know needs to be plumbed in more depth. So this is my controversial question. While obviously not on the same scale, do you recognize some of the same trends in political language that now are starting to form in modern Australian society that might have existed in South Africa? I'm thinking about more racialized preferences and sort of oppressor oppressed Marxist type of language with regard to different groups. Is that something that is familiar to you in some sense?
Okay, yes and no, but it's slightly more complex. How the way I'd look at it. Um, I think what Australia is going through right now, or in fact, what the whole Western world is going through, but I think particularly the Anglo world is going through
Mm,
this, and Trumpianism is the visible sign of all of this. What I think has happened is that often after the Second World War, there was a consensus that emerged, and it was a consensus that said we've just gone through this hell where we had these crazy nationalists wreak havoc upon Europe, and
mm,
this must never happen again. Okay, that was the consensus. It was like we don't want this. It was an anti-nationalist consensus.
yeah.
That's what we've had ever since 1945. Ever since 1945, being a nationalist has been completely unacceptable.
Mm,
Okay, and there was it comes out of the Second World War where you had an alliance effectively between liberals and communists to beat fascists. That's what
mm,
the alliance was. And that
mm,
even though you had the Cold War afterwards, during the Cold War, that consensus held up. They might disagree on a hell of a lot of things, but what they did agree on is that nationalism is unacceptable.
mm,
And by extension, that later transformed into this racism thing. Okay. From the
yeah.
60s onwards, it's nationalism and racism, which are the same thing, apparently. But you can't
Mm,
be a nationalist, you can't be a racist, you can't be an ethnicist. These are all bad things.
mm,
Okay. Now, I think that's what's breaking down. I think the
mm,
1944-45 consensus is disintegrating before our very eyes.
mm,
And again, it's very complex as to I'm in the process of actually trying to write a book about this because I'm trying to work it out. And
yeah.
there's lots of stuff about it. But as the consensus is breaking down, you see Trump coming along, you see nationalism coming back.
Mm,
I mean, you see coming Trump, that's what Trump represents. He's an American nationalist. That would have
yeah.
been unheard of 20 years ago, even 10
Yeah.
years ago. And
And
the
I mean,
same
look,
thing.
this is very familiar territory to me because the national conservative movement globally, likes to stress there's a healthy nationalism, and
Mhm.
which isn't the Zig Heil variety. Not all
Exactly.
nationalism needs to be that. Not all you can have, and it's a very important. Yoram Hazony wrote a great book on the virtue of nationalism, which I'm sure you've probably are familiar with and read, which does stress the fact that the Irish establishing their nation, the Israelis establishing a nation, the Italians, and they were great in the past pre World War II period was as admirable things in a way. I mean, with all the obviously the bumps and scrapes that go along the way. But it was a thing that one could be proud of. But then post World War II, the attitude towards nationalism changed, and South Africa's such a mix because
Was
there's
clobbered by that.
so many different internal ethnic groups with their own claims
Yes.
for some type of nation, or at least it's hard to pull a nation together with those different ethnic groups. I guess is the short summary.
And of course,
Hey,
and what you after the Second World War as well, not only did you have that consensus,
mm,
but it also, if you watched what happened over the next 30 years after the war, all nationalist governments were removed. They just got knocked out one after another by this global consensus, of one of which was South Africa. The Rhodesians got knocked out. The South Africans got knocked out. Um, and you had the Portuguese, the Spanish, many of these places got knocked out. I think that's important to look at. Um, and the South Africans got branded as Nazis, but I don't think they were. Kind of goes that goes, in my opinion, some way toward explaining what South Africans got caught up in that.
Mm,
So South Africans got billed as Nazis. It was as simple as that. I mean, I still have that. It's
mm,
amazing. If you're a white South African, people will go. You get this look. We call it the look. And you go,
mm,
we know about you. You're a Nazi.
yeah,
And the curious thing was that the guy who created apartheid was a guy called Milan, and he specifically went to war against the Nazis in South Africa. And because he was a preacher man, Dutch Reform preacher man. And when he founded the South African version, the Afrikaner version of nationalism, it was a little bit like the NatCon thing. If you read what he said and what they say, very little difference. And he said Nazism is unchristian. Now, because coming
mm,
from a preacher man, that's very important.
yeah,
And the National Party went to war with their own local Nazi party, who were in fact called the RVB. And they went to war with these guys and beat
interesting,
them
yeah,
eventually.
mm,
So, but nonetheless, outside the country, white South Africans are Nazis, and it's still there. And that's why the Americans stopped it, because they were portrayed as Nazis. And that's how Americans saw them. And so when they came in, they went, "Nah, you guys are unacceptable. Not even gonna listen to you guys. Don't want to hear it."
yeah,
That's kind of
that's definitely impression. I mean, everyone remembers the Lethal Weapon 2 and the way the South Africans were
stuff.
portrayed there, the
Exactly.
accent
All
and
those things. Yes.
yeah, those
Yep.
films. Hey, I could talk to you for a lot longer. There's so much to learn, but you try to keep these things to an hour. If people want to find out more about you and your work, I mean, there are books online, but what's the best way for them to find out that?
My goodness. Ah. Um. I suppose just Google.
Dr. Eric
I
Louw.
use P Eric Louw, but if
Yeah,
you
Eric Louw.
put Eric Louw at UQ, it'll throw up lots of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah,
I was
great
there for
stuff.
a long time.
Eric, I really appreciate you coming on at such short notice to talk about this stuff because I know there are moments when the spotlight does turn to particular nations, and the White House meeting was something that prompted the attention on South Africa. But it's such a complicated and interesting, fundamentally interesting place, and one that I have a soft spot for as well. So, thanks again, and look forward to catching up in future.
Yeah, indeed. Okay.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.